want to share, we always start with a little bit of a safety announcement. In case there's something that might happen, we'll hear the voice from down at the security desk. I'd ask you to follow. Heather's going to be the security officer, make sure everybody's safe. We'll use that door right there. That's the one that's closest to the exit. It'll take us down to the street level, and we'll get everybody safe and take care. We'll go over to the National Geographic. They used to be open for ice cream. I don't know if they're open anymore for ice cream, but we'll take care of everybody. So just follow instructions from Heather if we have to do anything. And let me just say a formal welcome now to all of you. Just really, I'm personally very pleased. As I said, this is my first opportunity in 18 months to really greet people and welcome them back into the building. I'm so pleased that we can do this. And the very first is to welcome the Tánaiste from Ireland, Leo Varadkar. It's fitting and very appropriate that he would be the first one that we can greet, because Ireland has always been first in many people's hearts here in the United States. We have such a strong bond, and it's so when all of the issues like Brexit came up, and the Tánaiste was quite instrumental, as you all know, in seeing Ireland through that very difficult period. That was the one thing America was firmly in. We're not going to let Brexit undermine, the peace accords, and he was instrumental to make sure that wouldn't be the case. And so many other ways that his leadership was crucial during the time, and during his earlier tenure when he was the Taoiseach. He took Ireland's economy to heights, and that's coming back. That'll be coming back, we know, because we know he's coming back. He's because of the agreement in the Parliament, he will be returning as the Taoiseach, I think next year or late this year. So we're going to have an opportunity not only to hear his perspective today on Ireland, but we're also going to get a little bit of an insight into where Ireland is going to go, because rarely do we know who's going to be the Prime Minister a year from now, but we do here. And so it's a real privilege that we have him here today. What we're going to do is the Tánaiste is going to come up and offer some preliminary remarks, and then we will turn it over to my colleagues, Heather Conley and Bill Reinsch, who are going to engage in a dialogue, and hopefully we'll bring all of you into it. So even though the volume of the applause is not going to be high, our enthusiasm is not diminished. Would you please, with your warm applause, welcome the Tánaiste from Ireland, His Excellency Leo Varadkar.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And I have to say it's a real pleasure to the opportunity to speak with you today on what is my first visit back to the US since the pandemic began. And it is great to be here. I love America. There would rarely have been a year that I didn't have a chance to visit at least once, if not twice, and it is great to be back here again. We'd love to see Americans in Ireland again, by the way. So I know that the travel restrictions are ending in November, and as far as Ireland is concerned, the rules that we apply is that anyone who's fully vaccinated is free to enter the country without the need for a test. So hopefully we will see a return to both business and leisure travel in the coming months, and would love to see you in Ireland in the next few months, if not next year. It has been a very long 18 months, as you know, but it is really great to be able to speak with people in person again when we spent so much time apart. And it is an honour to be one of your first guests to address people in public, as well as, of course, being joined online by others. Let me start at the outset by acknowledging the work of the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, our host today. I think COVID-19 has demonstrated the value and importance of research and expertise, and your insight will be invaluable as we navigate our way out of the pandemic. And it is a pandemic that demonstrates once again the extent to which so many of the problems that we face transcend national borders and are international in origin and therefore require international solutions. That's true of the pandemic, it's true of climate change, and it's true of many of the strategic challenges that we face. So to begin with COVID, it was on my first trip to Washington DC, or rather my last trip to Washington DC, that the scale of the pandemic was becoming apparent, and that was back in March 2019. I was travelling here for the traditional St. Patrick's Day events when the Irish Taoiseach and Ministers travelled the world to visit our allies. And on that day, met with the President. Remember, it was on that day that he announced that flights from Europe were going to stop. Also met congressional leaders, and it was indeed that evening that news was filtering through that we in Ireland, or our health experts in Ireland, were recommending that we should take drastic action to slow the virus and to stop it in its tracks. A lot has happened since then, and very sadly, a lot of lives have been lost, both here and in Ireland and Europe. And I don't think there's anyone in this room who's left untouched. I think everybody knows somebody who has passed away as a consequence of COVID, or at least somebody who's been ill as a consequence of COVID. Economically, for employers and workers, it's been an exceptionally challenging time. In Ireland, we took a decision very early on to try and save as many jobs and businesses as possible, and we introduced unprecedented financial interventions and supports to do so. For example, we introduced a €350 a week payment for any worker that was laid off as a consequence of the pandemic. We introduced work subsidies to help employers keep people on, reduced sales tax, gave a weekly cash grant to any business that was closed, introduced low-cost loans, debt warehousing, an enhanced illness benefit for workers who were told they had to isolate or restrict their movements as a consequence of COVID, and also brought in a commercial property tax waiver. These actions, as you can imagine, have placed considerable demands on our national finances. We've borrowed something in the region of €40 billion, which is small money for the American government, but big money for an Irish government, I can guarantee you, in order to soften the blow of the pandemic. But I'm sure that it was the right thing to do. And as a consequence of that, we will bounce back quickly and be able to service and pay down that debt. So over the next couple of months, we're phasing out those financial supports as we phase out the restrictions and as we reopen businesses and allow them to get back on their feet. As things stand in Ireland, over 90% of adults, in fact 90% of people over 16 are fully vaccinated, and we're now moving on to vaccinating teenagers and giving that third dose to people who need them. And as a consequence of that, even though the incidence of the virus is not low, the numbers in hospital and the numbers dying, thankfully, is stable and relatively low. And it's our intention on the 22nd of October to end pretty much all remaining legal restrictions as a consequence of COVID. While this virus has surprised us on a few times in the past, things do look good, and it looks like we'll be able to do that on October 22nd. Not going back to the old normal, but a new normal that isn't all that different from the old normal. The only restrictions really will be the requirement to wear a mask in retail settings, healthcare settings, and on public transport, and of course the requirement to isolate yourself and get a test if you're sick. But really everything else will be open on October 22nd, and I think it's fair to say that we're all very much looking forward to that. Thankfully, pre-COVID, we entered the pandemic in good shape financially. We had a small budget surplus, a growing economy, and we're close to full employment. Furthermore, throughout the pandemic, and indeed after our last recession, our export-led traded sector proved to be extremely resilient, many of which are US companies based in Ireland, in the tech sector, digital, and pharmaceuticals and medical devices as well. So tax receipts in Ireland held up very well, even though unemployment rose, allowing us to intervene decisively in the way that we did. And while Ireland is widely known as a significant European hub for US foreign direct investment, investment flows across the Atlantic, as we know, are not all one way. The United States has always been a really important market for Irish companies, and today almost 1,000 companies of Irish origin employ 110,000 people in all US states. This makes Ireland the 9th largest source of foreign direct investment into the United States, and I think that's a remarkable achievement for a country and an economy approximately 1/70th the size of the US. So I'm really glad to see that Irish companies in the US have shown great resilience to the challenges of COVID-19. Ireland is a fantastic place to do business, and we've 4 strengths that I believe set us apart from many of our competitors. First of all, we have a very young, well-educated workforce, and we're investing in education and lifelong learning all the time to build on that. We're very competitive, which is underpinned by an attractive business environment. We're very connected, with 70 million people claiming Irish descent around the world, and we have a truly international workforce. We have the advantage, almost unique advantage at this stage, of being part of the EU's single labour market, as well as the United Kingdom's. And we have a position at the heart of Europe, its single market and Eurozone. So we have an economic plan in place, which will allow us to build back better than before, to get our people back to work, and also to seize the new opportunities that arise from the post-pandemic economy. I hope that Ireland will continue to be a fruitful partner for the many US businesses who choose us as their second home. On Brexit, the EU-UK Trade Cooperation Agreement, or TCA, and the Withdrawal Agreement, including the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, have ensured that we've avoided the worst of what Brexit could have wrought on us. Brexit is not a policy that we advocated. It's not something that we ever wanted, though we do respect our neighbour's decision to leave. The Northern Ireland Protocol is the joint EU-UK solution to mitigate the disruption that Brexit has caused for citizens and businesses on the island of Ireland, and indeed in the United Kingdom. We continue to advocate for a calm, responsible, joint EU-UK approach to the implementation of the protocol. The protocol's primary objective was to ensure that there would be no hard border between North and South, and that has been achieved. If you go to the border today, it looks no different than it did 4 or 5 years ago before the Brexit referendum. And indeed, trade flows between North and South have increased considerably in both directions, thus helping to strengthen the all-island economy. Crucially, the European single market has been protected, something that was essential for us and also our EU allies. But there has been disruption in the flow of goods from Britain to Northern Ireland, more so than many of us anticipated, and that has caused problems that we wish to resolve. So the Irish government welcomes the continuation of technical talks between the two sides. We strongly encourage the United Kingdom to work in partnership with the EU in order to identify pragmatic solutions and sustainable solutions to the outstanding issues around the implementation of the protocol. However, we are clear that the protocol is an international agreement. It has been agreed and cannot be renegotiated from scratch. Our approach, which is shared by our EU colleagues, continues to be informed by engagements with people and businesses in Northern Ireland, taking on board their genuine concerns as we seek to find realistic solutions. We are confident that those solutions do exist within the parameters of the protocol for the issues that have arisen to date. And I have to say once again, we greatly appreciate the steadfast US understanding and support for Ireland as we navigate our way through Brexit, a decision we regret but accept. Away from COVID and Brexit, I might highlight once again that Ireland is one of the world's most open, export-based economies, with trade being a critical factor in our economic success. Our attractiveness as a place to invest and our ability to enter into and honour international free trade agreements with other countries is the foundation of our economic model. With no oil, gas, diamonds or colonies, what we've had to do consistently to raise our living standards is to build our wealth on the goods and services we produce and sell abroad. In recent years and pre-COVID, the opportunities that international trade offers has been challenged by disruptive geopolitical, technological and financial forces that could have implications for the US and Ireland alike. the loss of some traditional employment on the one hand, and skills challenges on the other, digitalisation and the need to decarbonise and focus on sustainability are challenges that all countries who advocate for free trade must consider. As some more traditional industries no longer are able to support significant levels of employment, we must invest in new opportunities in the industries of the 21st century, including services and sustainable manufacturing. These are the challenges for both Ireland and the US, and I see your Build Back Better agenda fully recognises this in setting out the United States roadmap for recovery. And with the EU and the US as leading first world economies, I believe we have a joint responsibility to shape the international trade policy agenda so that it works for citizens, employees, businesses, and more broadly for society. We also have a responsibility towards our trade partners and producers and workers in third countries, especially those that are less developed economically. We believe that such openness also means that others, such as US businesses and entrepreneurs, should continue to see the EU as an honest and reliable partner, one that is fair, consistent, and predictable in developing its trade policies, yet firm and committed when it comes to defending human rights and expectations of its economic operators, and holding our partners to honouring their commitments across the bilateral and multilateral trade agenda. We've witnessed across the globe in recent times, exacerbated by the pandemic, calls for the reshoring of manufacturing and the shortening of supply chains. These populist calls do not, in our view, bear up to proper economic scrutiny. More appropriate responses should be rooted in a twin-track approach of strengthening and diversifying supply chains while acknowledging the appropriateness of strategic stockpiling of emergency goods. Our international trade policies must be reviewed, naturally, but we must not create new vulnerabilities, increase costs, and stifle innovation by taking short-term, knee-jerk actions that are not in the strategic long-term interests of economic progress and development. The multilateral trade agenda continues to be of real importance for Ireland. The World Trade Organization is the central rule maker for international trade, making it easier for value chains to expand and economies to benefit from comparative advantage and specialisation. It also plays a vital role in helping less advantaged countries to gain from trade and profit from growing connections with international markets. The WTO is imperfect. All international organisations are, and there are many valid criticisms of it. And I know many of these come from the US. For Ireland, we continue to see the need for an open, fair, rules-based international trading system which stands up to protectionism, ensures a fair environment for all businesses to operate in, and creates prosperity by opening up markets worldwide. So while the WTO is currently threatened, I say we need to stand up for it, businesses as well as political leaders, while promoting and ensuring that it reforms. Tariffs, while attractive in the short run, ultimately target the consumer, increase prices, and reduce choice. Tariffs generally protect inefficient industries and delay reform and restructuring, ultimately at the expense of wider society. They also run counter to the law of comparative advantage, which recognises that specialisation is more efficient and promotes innovation. So I would strongly argue that new tariffs and increased tariffs are not the answer to a transforming global economy. Rather, multilateral negotiations and agreements is the best and well-worn road to travel. So I have to say I very much welcome the fact that the EU and the US are now fully engaged on resolving outstanding current trade irritants in the civil aviation dispute, and hopefully in the coming weeks on the steel and aluminium dispute as well. So to conclude, post-Brexit, with a new administration here in DC, we have a real opportunity to reforge the Atlantic alliance between Europe and the US, one that has been so successful in political terms, economic terms, and strategic terms, an alliance which is a force for good, for stability, security, and prosperity in the world. Ireland wants to be part of that alliance, and indeed, a bridge in that alliance. Through our EU membership, we're working closely with our EU colleagues to progress stronger trade relations and a renewed political and security partnership with the United States. And if the past 18 months have taught us anything, it is that no challenge is insurmountable in the face of our collective spirit and ingenuity. We can employ those same traits to rebuild now a more just society and a thriving economy for both our countries. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
When Heather and I have finished our interrogation, we're going to have time for questions, and we'll begin with questions from the live audience. So get back in practice. We will have a microphone wandering around, and you actually can do something that you probably haven't done for 18 months, which is stand up and say who you are and ask a question. We will also have time for questions from our online audience, and I think that those that RSVP'd had instructions about what to do if you want to submit a question, and they'll be written down here and handed over to me, and I'll ask your questions. So that's the plan, and I think what Heather and I have done is divide up the workload a little bit. Heather's going to ask the large, cosmic, important questions that will capture the news headlines, and I'm going to ask the weedy trade and economic questions that no one will pay attention to tomorrow. So Heather, why don't we start with you?
Well, thank you, Bill, and it is fantastic to do this in person, and thank you so much for your remarks. I think it's only fitting. You closed the transatlantic door, and now you're reopening it. So you are our perfect bookends to open. So our dear colleague, Bob Schieffer, always says, let's start with the news. So you're not getting off the Brexit hook. We're going to dive deeply into the protocol and the TCA. But as I was preparing for this conversation over the weekend, I was also preparing to observe closely the German election outcome. And today, Chancellor Merkel is now an official caretaker government status. And so I thought I'd just start with the news. You sat around the European Council table with Chancellor Merkel. What does her legacy mean for Europe, and any personal reflections you may have on her legacy and this future new coalition government that is going to take a while to form? I just thought I'd have to ask you the news first, and then we'll dive into the subject matter.
Yeah, well, I suppose. Well, first of all, I should say that the doors between the U.S. and Ireland and the EU are definitely now open, and really good to hear about the news about the travel restrictions being dropped in November. We dropped ours a few months ago now, back in July, I think it was. And Anthony Fauci was actually on Irish radio on Saturday, on one of the most listened to radio shows, to make the point that it was safe for Irish people to travel here and vice versa. So hopefully... Thank
you for that advertisement.
Yeah, obviously be careful and take all the necessary precautions, but it's particularly for fully vaccinated people traveling again, we're confident that the public health data says that's safe to do, and it does reopen the possibility, I think, of necessary business travel, which I hope will resume over the next little while. Because as I said earlier, there are 100,000 Americans employed in Irish-owned companies here, and those Irish owners haven't seen their companies, and vice versa. So hopefully we'll get back to that soon. But having digressed, to answer your question, I think the nature of the European political systems, including in Ireland, is it'll be many months before a coalition is formed. So I think the Merkel caretaker government could well be around until Christmas or into the new year. And as I learned leading a caretaker government during a pandemic, caretaker governments have full constitutional authority to govern, so I believe she'll be around for a little while yet. I have to say, she's somebody who I found to be a really strong ally. The CDU is our sister party, so we had a relationship at party level as well as intergovernment level. But I think one thing that is very strong about the German political system is it's rarely personality based. The Chancellor is not directly elected in the way the US President is. That means you often have politicians who are sort of good at focusing on detail and compromise and solutions, and she was very much in that space. And also it's a federal state. And particularly during Brexit, she had a particular understanding that small states matter, because in the German system, it isn't all about Bavaria or Niedersachsen. Like Saarland matters, and Schleswig-Holstein and all those small states really matter too. And I definitely think there were, at various points in time, some people in London who were strong advocates of Brexit, who thought the big countries could just meet someday and sort it out. Like would have been the case in the 18th or 19th century. Paris, Berlin, London, and maybe Rome would meet and sort it out. That was never going to happen while she was there, because she understood the importance of respecting small states in a sort of federal or confederal system. And that was crucial. But I think that'll actually carry through to any future German Chancellor because of that system that they understand so well.
Well, you're great. I think we'll see you for a while, and her details and step-by-step approach was certainly essential. All right, I'll come back, but Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
One final thing that I would say about that, though, is like, as is often the case, politicians are caricatured, and I'm not sure about here, but in Ireland she was a little bit caricatured as being kind of stern, or very serious, as Germans often are caricatured as, but that's not the woman that I knew. She was very warm, very chatty, and even a bit gossipy after meetings and so on, and like a very normal, down-to-earth person, and I just hope she's a great life post-politics.
We are looking forward to hearing more about her encore career after Chancellor. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bill, now you can dig down into the trade issues.
I noticed they've sold out a teddy bear that looks like her, so that may have something to do with softening her image. Yes, it's got the hair and the hands and the symbol that she uses a lot. I want to turn to an issue where an economic issue where Ireland's been in the forefront of the debate, and that's the global minimum tax. And I believe your government has said that it wants to be in the tent on a global minimum tax. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that means. What are your problems, and what would it take you to get you to sign up to the OECD deal?
Well, you don't expect me to answer that question.
Of course we do.
At least,
we'd like you to make some news. That's what we would like.
Bluntly or overtly. But I suppose I can try and answer it in a number of ways. I think, first of all, the position that the Irish government takes, and a lot of countries in Europe take, and I think the US would take as well, is that setting tax rates is a sovereign issue. Ultimately, we decide what our income tax rate is, what our corporate tax rate is, what our capital gains tax rate is, and we'd be very loath to depart from that principle that this is a sovereign decision for any government, and that's why we retain the option of not participating in any international agreement or any European directive on it. But that's not our preference. We would rather be in the tent, as you said. Both politically and economically, it would make more sense for us to be inside any global framework, and it's in our nature to be inside global frameworks. It's our instinct, and that's where we want to be. But one thing that has worked very well for us in our system is to have this low corporation tax rate. But it's not just the rate; it's the reliability. So, through boom and bust, through recession, through periods of growth, through changes of government, that rate has remained the same and low. So if you're making a 30 or 40-year investment in Ireland, you know what the rules are. And that's why we'd want to keep it low and keep it constant. And among the things that we would be concerned about is this idea that it would be at least 15%, because it might then go higher. So, at any rate, we would want to know that it is the rate, and it'll stay at the rate and won't change in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We'd certainly need to be assured that it would actually be implemented by all of the countries signing up to it. obviously anything like that would have to go through US Congress. It would have to go through the European Parliament and national parliament. So we need to know that everyone was doing it, and some countries didn't end up adopting it.
But you
others
wouldn't be
didn't.
bothered if the United States the president's proposed 21%. That wouldn't bother you, would it? If we went to 21?
Well, it would.
I mean, war does not complicate your life, I don't think.
Say it again?
A higher tax rate elsewhere does not complicate Ireland's life, does it?
Well, the rate that other countries choose is their business, and yeah, like a higher rate here doesn't necessarily affect us. But what would affect us is what the administration might do with guilty, you know, and we would need to see where that might be set. I think it's now at maybe 10.5 or something. So
That's what they're talking about,
yeah,
increasing.
Yeah,
but
so
it's,
that would have an impact on us. But we totally respect the right of the US to make that decision.
Let me move on to a digital question and then I'll turn it back to Heather for some more. Has your government taken a view on the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act? Do you support them? Do you want to see changes?
Yeah, we're broadly supportive of the current package. It's under negotiation, as you know, at European level at the moment. And it's really designed to do two things. You know, it's designed to respect privacy, designed to make sure that harmful online content is better regulated and removed because of some of the you know, terrible things that are really happening in the social media space at the moment. And it's also designed to make sure that those very big, large platforms don't become monopolistic or don't abuse their market position. So the intentions are good behind it, and we're broadly supportive of where we are at the moment with the compromise. But it's very much something that we want to have a watching brief on because you know, the future is digital, and that's increasingly going to be the case. So we don't want to stifle change or innovation, but we do want to make sure that platforms don't wield excessive power and that people's privacy is protected and that harmful content can be removed. There's
concern here that these bills are really targeted at large American companies like Google, Amazon, and the GAFA companies. Do you believe that? Is that the intent?
I don't think that's going to be the outcome. I believe there are some people who would like to use these tools for that purpose, not in Ireland, but perhaps in other places. And there's a feeling in some parts of Europe that America is so far ahead of us on tech and on digital that the best way to fix that, to enable Europe to catch up, is to kind of blunt or stunt the US corporations. That's not my approach to it, and it's not the Irish government's approach to it. You know, we don't think that you achieve innovation and you drive technological development by, you know, protectionistic measures. So so I suppose, you know, there are those different elements in this debate at the moment, but certainly we would envisage an outcome that just makes sure that people have fair access to platforms, that there is more open access, and that we do improve the situation in relation to privacy and harmful content in particular.
Well, it's true that kneecapping the competition is a time-honored tactic, but not one that we're excited about either.
It doesn't make you better, but yeah.
Well, you have exceptional influence, I think, on this whole process because the Ireland's Data Protection Commission has is responsible for a lot of the initial judgments on these things, since so many of these companies are headquartered in Ireland. How do you or do you have any difficulty reconciling your position as a desirable location for the same large high-tech firms we're talking about at the same time that you're a leader in enforcing digital regulation?
Yeah, well, I'd hope being, you know, providers of good regulation can become part of our offering, and will be one of the things that make us competitive. You know, it's never been the case that we encourage people to invest in Ireland on the basis that we'd poor regulation or light touch regulation. We want to have good regulation, and our regulator is independent of government and very much acts independently, and is often criticised from both sides. if we're doing too much or not doing enough. And often when you're a good regulator, that's probably the right space to be in. One thing we are doing, which I think is really important and have done over the years, is really developing the capacity of the regulator. Because we are a small country, but we're huge when it comes to tech, that we need to make sure that office is well resourced and properly resourced, and that's very much what we're doing.
Heather, back to you.
I'm going to swing you from the technology to the technical implementation of the Northern Protocol. You had said, I believe it was an interview some time ago, that the protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, was a means to an end. So I want to talk about the end game a little bit. The European Union, I think, has remained quite calm in the face of some voices from London demanding a renegotiation of the protocol. Your remarks were very clear. This will occur within the protocol, but flexibility will be had. The European Union is going to put forward a package, sort of that what we would call best and final offer, perhaps, of the flexibility within the Northern Ireland Protocol. Are you positive or encouraged that the British government will accept that, or are we going to head into something much messier, potentially at the end of the year, should the UK not accept those offerings, whatever they are, that this may require Brussels to actually begin to punish for lack of implementation? Help us understand where you think this is going.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that the European Commission and Maros Šefčovič, who's leading on this for the European Commission, is taking a very reasonable approach. He's made the point of going to Northern Ireland on several occasions, really meeting with the business community, trying to find out what the problems are and what they're not. Some of the problems that are happening in terms of supply chain are not just happening in Northern Ireland. There are some minor issues around supply chain in the Republic of Ireland. Protocol doesn't apply to us, but they're happening anyway because of COVID and because of Brexit. And we can see in England real difficulties because they've left the single market, because they've left the single labour market. Gas stations closed, concerns about products getting to them by Christmas. My sister lives in London, sent me pictures of empty shelves in a supermarket in London. She's not the kind of person who would regularly do that type of thing or overreact to things. So, there are real supply problems now in England. That is not because the protocol doesn't apply to England. It only applies to Northern Ireland. So I think some of the difficulties that are being experienced in Northern Ireland are less about the protocol and more about COVID and Brexit. But they're all getting wrapped into one, and the protocol is being blamed. But in terms of being a means to an end, the end was no hard border between North and South. So it's worked in that regard. We'd have to make sure that any changes or any flexibilities don't undermine that fact that there are no checks between North and South. And it's good to see North-South trade increasing substantially. The second is that the European single market is not undermined. And that's crucial for us. We can't see Ireland's place in the European single market being undermined as a consequence of Brexit. But the third, and I think this is the area that we need to work on, is we try to design the protocol in such a way that Northern Ireland would have the advantage of largely unrestricted trade, both with the European Union and with Great Britain. And it is the case that some of the checks and controls that have been imposed on trade from Britain into Northern Ireland have caused difficulties. And we don't want that to be the case. And I think it's very important that the European Union and the UK work together to be as flexible as that as they can be. If we can be assured that certain goods entering Britain into Northern Ireland aren't going to come south, aren't going to come into the single market, then we wouldn't have a difficulty with that. So there are issues that I think need to be resolved, and I think we need to be sensitive to the concerns of the unionist community in Northern Ireland, that any restrictions on trade between Britain and Northern Ireland to them feel like a diminution of their place in the United Kingdom, even though trade in itself is not a constitutional issue. Many of them feel that it is, and we have to be sensitive to that and wise to that, and try and resolve problems as best we can.
I think the one thing that concerns all of us, I'm sure you and others, is the threats, if I may put it that way, that London will use Article 16, the special measures, which would be stopping, and that would challenge the north-south border for sure. Over the weekend, we had Commissioner McGuinness, saying that these kinds of conversations aren't helpful. One of a spokesperson from your party was saying that we're sort of tiring of this routine, that the threat of using Article 16. Is the government making contingency plans should there be just a failure of working through this flexibility of the protocol, or at this point you're full confident that the EU and the UK will find a way through this?
Well, we always have contingency plans, and it'd be irresponsible for any government not to have contingency plans, even for unlikely outcomes. So, we've had them really from the early days after the referendum, have made different plans for different scenarios. But I would hope that this can be resolved in a sensible, calm way that doesn't result in a showdown of that nature. People often talk about Brexit being done. The truth is Brexit will never be done. It's a fundamental change in the relationship between Britain and Ireland and between Britain and the European Union. And just as is the case in our relations with countries not in the European Union, but near neighbours like Norway, like Switzerland, like the UK, we're constantly having to renegotiate and negotiate arrangements. The beauty of the European Union and the single market is everyone signed up to a single acquis, a single set of rules, regulations and laws. When you're outside of that but connected to it, it becomes extremely complicated. I couldn't count the number of treaties and agreements that exist between the EU and Switzerland, or between the EU and Norway and other near neighbours. And I think that's probably going to be the relationship with Britain for the next couple of decades, that we're going to have ongoing agreements, ongoing treaties. Issues will arise that have to be resolved, and it's best that that's done in, I think, a calm way and a sensible way and a measured way, and not be escalated to a political crisis or bring into play issues around nationalism. I just don't think how any of us will benefit from that in the long term.
One quick last question. I'm going to throw it back to Bill. When Foreign Minister Coveney was here just very recently, some real concern about potentially institutions in Northern Ireland collapsing. And even in the process of negotiating the protocol, we didn't have a functioning government in Stormont. You have really spent the time, as you've noted, with those leaders listening. Are you concerned that the Belfast Agreement is risk of collapsing because of the pressures from the protocol?
Well, I think one thing we should never forget about the Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement, is that it was ratified by the people, not just by political parties. It was adopted in a referendum by 97% of people in the Republic of Ireland, over 70% in Northern Ireland. I think political parties in the north and in the south need to bear that in mind. This agreement belongs to the people, north and south. For any one political party or group of political parties to bring it down, I think in many ways that they're going against what I believe is the settled will of people north and south. And one of the real problems during Brexit, during that 3-year period where we were trying to negotiate agreement with the United Kingdom, was that the institutions weren't operating. There was no Assembly in Northern Ireland, there was no executive. So the politicians in Northern Ireland, instead of speaking as ministers or as a government on behalf of the general interest of Northern Ireland, were speaking from a party point of view. I think it would be a mistake for any party in Northern Ireland to bring down the executive or the Assembly, because once again, there's nobody actually speaking for Northern Ireland. So, for example, if we were getting to the point where we were able to come to some agreement around the protocol, there'd be no First Minister to talk to, there'd be no Enterprise Minister to talk to, or Economy Minister. And I think that would be a major disadvantage to the North if it lost its executive and Assembly.
Bill?
Let me turn to climate for a few minutes, and then we'll turn to the audience. The EU's proposed a CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Measure. What's your government's view on that? Do you support going down that road?
We do, so long as it's a genuine environmental measure and not a protectionist one. So, like for us, CBAM is all about carbon leakage. We don't want a situation whereby we set high standards around the environment and emissions, which cause industries to close or wind down in Europe, only for us to import those same products from other parts of the world where they don't have the same environmental standards, because that doesn't make sense from either perspective. It doesn't make sense from an economic perspective, but it certainly doesn't make sense from a climate perspective, because it's all the one atmosphere. And if we're reducing our emissions in Europe only for somewhere in South America or China to increase their emissions, we actually lose out environmentally. So, we would only see that as something we could support if it was a genuine environmental measure. So if, for example, we saw beef production in Ireland being reduced only to import beef from South America, that wouldn't make sense environmentally or economically. And certainly for other European countries, their big concern is around steel, is that if we bring in environmental rules that cause steel production to be reduced in Europe only for it to be imported from elsewhere, that just doesn't make sense. So, but it would have to be a genuine tax that's about avoiding carbon leakage and not one that's a stealth tariff, if you like.
You're committed to, the government's committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. What do you have to do to get there?
Oh, well, a lot. And before then, we need to get to 51% reduction by 2030. That's now in law. We have a very ambitious climate law in Ireland, and we need to achieve annual reductions of about 7%. And that's going to be hard to do. I remember saying before the pandemic that to achieve some of the environmental targets, everyone would have to stay at home for a year. And guess what we did? and emissions still only went down by 6 or 7%. And I think that demonstrates the extent to which our systems need to change. We still have energy systems that are almost entirely dependent on oil and gas and coal. That needs to change. It needs to be renewable, interconnectivity, hydrogen. It's going to take time, but we need to do it. And also when it comes to industry, for example, under our carbon budgeting system, each sector is going to be set a target. Agriculture, industry, buildings, you name it, that we have to meet. And the one that I'll be responsible for is emissions from industry. So industry makes up about 13% of our emissions at the moment. We'll need to get them down by about half. And that's going to mean big changes, particularly for our big heavy industry, to move them off oil and gas to new energy systems. But it's a change in a lot of our systems, and it's going to be difficult to do. I think we have to do it. The public, particularly younger people, are demanding that we do it, and they're right, because they're the ones who will bear the consequences of failing to take climate action. But there's also big economic opportunities as well. Certainly Ireland as a net importer of energy, we have this vision and ambition that perhaps in a few decades we could become an exporter of energy rather than importing oil and gas and coal from abroad, that we could use our massive wind resource both to produce wind, which you can then sell to the rest of Europe, but turn excess wind into hydrogen. So if we could do that now, that would be a huge economic benefit for Ireland, and we would then also be saying to companies that might invest in Ireland that this is the place where you go to get your sustainable energy. But the scale of change that has to happen is enormous and requires huge investment, but it's exciting too.
At that point, let me slip in a question from the online audience because it's on the same topic. This is from Sean Finlay of Geoscience Ireland. How confident are you that COP26 will be effective?
In Glasgow?
In what?
26 is Glasgow, isn't it?
Yeah. COP26,
yeah.
yes,
Glasgow.
Yeah, well, to see what they decide first. I'll pass on that because it hasn't happened yet. Hope it will be.
Yeah.
Okay. Heather, do you have one more, and then we'll go to the live audience?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the politics of relationships. And I found your comment at the end of your remarks about reforging the transatlantic relationship. Feels like the transatlantic relationship has really experienced some turbulence over the last 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, in some ways, starting with the visa ban that was definitely not fully appreciated by our European colleagues. The Afghanistan withdrawal was also very difficult. And then, of course, the last week and a half of the announcement of the U.S., UK, Australian alliance, where you had EU Commissioner Thierry Breton talk about the need to pause and reset a very broken transatlantic relationship. You know, Ireland plays such an important role in the Irish-American relationship. How would you reforge that relationship? The trade relationship feels stagnant. There's not going to be a TTIP. There's not going to be, the Biden administration has stated, you know, no major trade deals here. How do you reforge that relationship? What advice would you give the White House or our colleagues in the Commission to reforge that relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's fair to say that some of the things that have happened in the past few weeks, you know, haven't been well received in Europe. You know, there was a huge level of high expectation when there was a change of administration that EU-US relations would thrive again. You know, particularly with the president who, you know, is a multilateralist and expressed a willingness to rebuild those relations. I think when it comes to Afghanistan, for some of the European countries that were participating in Afghanistan, you know, they were kind of willing to stay if the US did. But if the US was leaving, there was no way they could stay on their own. And while I haven't spoken to her about it, I certainly get the sense that Chancellor Merkel regrets that decision was made. And we can see the consequences of that now with the Taliban taking over so quickly and what that's going to mean for women in particular in Afghanistan, but others too. And then obviously what happened with Australia certainly surprised the French, and they were caught off guard. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but you know, you would have hoped that they were pre-warned and pre-consulted, and it didn't just come as a surprise. But I think the reason why we have to reforge and re-strengthen this relationship is really for other reasons. You know, after the Berlin Wall fell, and was one of my formative experiences as a teenager watching all those events happen, it was almost as though the march of democracy and the advancement of human rights and personal freedoms and free enterprise and free trade, and this was going to be the way it was going to be from now on. And we've seen that retreat. You know, we've seen a retreat of democracy in large parts of the world, human rights coming under pressure in places where it wasn't as much an issue before. We see the return to protectionism. And among the things that Europe and America largely share are those same values. You know, that belief in democracy, that belief in collective security, that belief in using institutions which America created, like the UN and Bretton Woods institutions, as means of settling disputes, a belief in enterprise, personal freedom, free trade. And these are the values that I think most Europeans and most Americans share. And if we don't stand together in defense of them, other forces in the world will become stronger than us collectively. And that's why we have to do it. And there are good things happening. You know, the Trade and Technology Council is meeting in Pittsburgh in a few days.
At least it's meeting. That's a really
good
sign.
There was a risk that it wouldn't, and it is, and it's happening at a very high level. And
Indeed.
You know, part of the agenda there is a very strong one around trade, around anti-market activities engaged in by other countries, and potentially us as the US and the EU setting common standards in new areas that could then become the international standard. So hopefully that'll go well.
Hopefully the TTC is starting the path to reforge. Bill, over to you.
Well, let's go to our live audience first. I've got some more questions from the online audience, so you don't have to perform, but is there anybody out there that has a question? Yes, sir.
Oh,
We have a microphone,
microphone there?
It's coming, maybe?
I think you have to go to the microphone.
Oh, you have to go to the wall. Sorry. It's over there.
We're still learning our routine too.
We're still practicing, yeah. Sure. Tell us who you are and then ask your question.
Sure, Suhail Khan with Microsoft Corporation. Grateful to CSIS and for you to be here. You graciously mentioned that each country has sovereignty to institute their own tax regime, but if I can press you a little further on the effort to institute something of a cartel that would have a minimum tax, what's your posture going forward on that effort? Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose I probably don't know much to add to what I said earlier on that. You know, just to say that, we have always been committed to the OECD process, to both pillars. One dealing with how base is calculated, and the other dealing with the minimum rate. But again, as I said earlier, we won't want to sign up to something that isn't overall in our economic interests, and we will, we continue to defend that principle that that tax is a sovereign issue. Might leave it at that.
Okay. Any other questions? If you think of, I'll ask one from the audience. If anybody else on the live audience has one, go over to the microphone. I'll see you and we'll call on you. Otherwise, you can hold your peace. This is from Doug Carr of the National Review. Ireland reduced government spending substantially and saw investment growth rise. What was the most effective way to reduce spending? Good lesson for our government. We can use some advice.
Yeah, well, it was effective. It wasn't pleasant or desirable. We had to reduce spending very significantly after the global financial crisis because we couldn't afford to borrow money. We were part of this arrangement with the European Union and the IMF. So, we had to reduce the pay of government workers and public sector workers. We had to reduce welfare other than pensions. We also had to increase taxes. None of that was nice or desirable. It was necessary, and it can be done. But I wouldn't advocate having to do it unless you really have to. And unfortunately, we had to, not because we thought that it was a great idea to do these things. We got in a position as a country that we lost the confidence of the bond markets and couldn't borrow and service our debt. So we had to do things that we wish to never have to do again.
Another question from the audience.
Hi there. My name's Garrett Downs. I'm from Inside U.S. Trade. I was wondering, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, when he was here last week, struck a very optimistic tone that the UK would strike a free trade agreement with the United States at some point in the near future. I'm curious, with the fact that TTIP was not able to be reached to a conclusion, what would be the effect of Britain striking a free trade agreement with the United States on Ireland or, other countries in the region? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Well, look, principally, if the UK and the US can strike a trade agreement, that's a matter for the UK and the US. It's not for us to try to interfere in. But I know that trade agreements aren't negotiated quickly, never mind ratified quickly. So I suspect that would be some time away if it does happen. The only thing I'd ask the US to bear in mind, and I know from talking to your political leaders that they will do this, is just to bear in mind, the impact that any US-UK agreement could have on the situation in Northern Ireland. So for example, if US products were to get into Britain and they were not compliant with the rules of the EU single market, those potentially travelling to Northern Ireland and from there into Ireland could be a difficulty. So, the only ask I would have is just to bear in mind that any agreement that the US may do with the UK could have an impact on Ireland and Northern Ireland, but certainly we're available to talk and engage on that if it gets to that point.
Okay, another one from the audience, actually from one of my college classmates, Eric Rasmussen. Do you see any bumps in the road regarding the near or midterm future of the euro?
There's always bumps in the road, but any concerns that people may have had a decade ago about the euro surviving, I think have been answered. And there were people openly, genuinely speculated about countries leaving the eurozone or the eurozone failing after the global financial crisis, and that didn't happen. And I think it's very solid now. And the question we talk about more at a European level is how we can make the euro stronger. Some new countries may join in the next decade. How potentially we can even make it compete with the dollar to become the reserve currency of choice in the future.
Bill, can I just jump in with a quick two-finger on that? Because that was sort of an issue even through the German election. The future sort of was the pandemic recovery and resilience facility, is that a one-time extravagance? Is that a Eurobond in the future? Changes to the Stability and Growth Pact? Are you go back to the rules, or are you a renegotiate the rules perspective?
Well, I think the position certainly of the outgoing German government has always been that that was a one-off, and that there shouldn't be what they describe as a debt union. It'll be interesting to see if and when there's a new German government,
Exactly.
what position they will take. Like Ireland has always been open to the idea of mutualization of debt. Not all our debts by any means, but the European Union as a whole borrowing together for European projects, and that's kind of always made sense to me. I understand the sensitivities around it for a lot of the Northern European countries in particular, that they don't like this idea that they would become responsible for other countries' debts. But if it was agreed that, a bit like what's happened, if it was agreed that it was for a particular purpose, like investment in infrastructure or in climate, and that we would all benefit from these investments, then to me it's something that makes sense. But it would have to be limited, and it would have to be agreed. Now, when the Recovery Fund was established, we did, as we always do, say it didn't set a precedent, but as we all know, that doesn't always turn out that way. But that'll be an interesting dynamic now to see whether that will be a change in policy in Berlin.
Exactly.
But of course, if the Liberals are in the coalition, it might not. So
It's going to be a
we'll
very
see.
interesting coalition platform, no matter what. Absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
Well, we have only one left. If you can
Okay.
give us one more minute, I think you can probably dispose of this one fairly quickly. Some European policymakers think the Commission should be more explicit that the goal of the DSA and DMA is to save democracy. Is that the goal, and should the Commission make that clearer?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm clear on that question. Is this the idea that the tech companies
This one's anonymous,
could bring down democracy? I don't think that's going to happen. But I do share concerns that I think a lot of people would have, is that social media platforms have enabled people to find each other who otherwise wouldn't in the past, and have allowed for the growth of of conspiracy theories and fake news and so on. But whether the DMA and DSA are going to be sufficient instruments to solve that problem, I don't know. I don't really think that's what they're about.
Well, that was a helpful note to end on, I think. Heather, any closing comment before we say goodbye?
No, again, just with gratitude, you really gave us a great tour de force of both the human, the interaction between our countries and the value of that, of our business communities, getting our economic engines back revving again, but also the importance and the fragility of peace and not underestimating that. So just with extraordinary gratitude that you were sort of bringing us back to life with your visit here and back to the in-person conversation. It's been great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And yes, it's been a great pleasure. It's an honor to have you here, and we hope we'll have you back, either as Tánaiste or Taoiseach in the future.
Either
one. You're welcome in both.
I'd be delighted to come back as a private citizen, or in any capacity.
That too, but the audience won't be as big if you come back as a private citizen. So thank you very much. Please thank